번째 컴퍼니는 보스턴 사이언티픽인데요. 프레젠터는 지금 거기서 아시아 패시픽 R&D 바이스 프레지던트인 미스터 랄프 P. Cardinal인데 전공 분야가 컴퓨터 엔지니어링입니다. 그래서 디렉터 카디널께서 강의를 해주실 텐데 Medical Device Meets Digital Health라는 주제로 서브타이틀은 Predicting Heart Failure Patient Decompensation입니다. Mr. Cardinal, please.
Great, good. I'm going to stand over here. So great, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It's always very difficult to follow Medtronic, but in this case, I'm happy to because everything that Dongwoo described as working with any of the global industry is true also for Boston Scientific. So I can skip over that and go into a couple of other things. Before I get started, I'm going to give an example of a very specific innovation for Boston Scientific around heart failure patients. But before I do, I'd like to describe a little bit about Asia Pacific. So although it says I'm from the US, I now live in Shanghai and covering Asia Pacific R&D for all of Boston Scientific. And within Asia Pacific, we have innovation centers both in India, 2 in China. We have an incubator located in Beijing with a collaboration with Tsinghua University. And in Korea, we have several different collaborations, one specifically with a hospital. And yesterday, I'm happy to say that I spent all day in Korea, my first time in Korea, other than the airport, visiting a hospital as well as the medical device center, K-Bio. So we're very excited to do further collaboration and participate in innovation in Korea. Now I need the clicker.
Go here and point right here.
Okay. Great.
Not work?
It's not working.
We usually use mouse on the podium.
Got it. Okay.
Just click.
Got it. All right. So just briefly, heart failure is both impacts patients, their quality of life, as well as the healthcare system in a very large way. If you look at the patients themselves, it greatly limits their life expectancy, as well as quality of life. And then in the US, as well as in Europe and everywhere, really, it's a very large burden on the healthcare systems. So I don't need to dwell on that. Boston Scientific took an approach, so we, in this case, it's in our cardiac rhythm management area, and so our implantable ICDs and CRTDs for heart failure patients. And what we did is we looked at all the different types of sensors in these devices, and then modified some of the information and looked at heart sounds, S1 and S3, thoracic impedance, respiration activity, and heart rate, and developed over a 10-year time frame, working with many different partners across the globe, including Asia Pacific, and clinical studies to identify how to predict a heart failure event in these heart failure patients, and thereby prevent them from going into the emergency department. And so briefly, the study, about 1,000 patients, and we modified the software implanted already in patients, into their devices, and then we're able to download that and perform some analysis, as well as also track heart failure events. So when they would go into the emergency department, et cetera. There are 2 sets, a development set and a test set. So the development set, obviously, we use to develop the algorithm using machine learning and artificial intelligence. And then the test set we reserved for later, so that when we submitted to the FDA, we ran the test set and submitted the results to make sure that it was sufficient to meet the endpoints. Just a little bit on the development set. So again, 500 patients in this one. And what we were looking for is a very high sensitivity, in this case 70, well, you'll see it in a minute, 70%. And then also, you don't want to have a lot of unexplained events, so events that aren't really events. So think of specificity. And so these sensors and the data from the sensors became basically a number, so a composite index. So you could think of data fusion, so fusing data from all these different sensors into one index that comes up with a number. And this is how we would then determine if a patient alert should be sent. And this is the development set. So we were based on the, this is the test set. The development set worked out very, very well, and we were able to get a sensitivity, as I mentioned, of 70% and a very high specificity as well. As importantly, we were able to get this alert 34 days in advance of a patient presenting into the emergency department. So before that event occurred, which is fantastic because that gives the physician, the clinician, enough time to prevent that patient from showing up in the emergency department or improve their quality of life. And so this is just a quick diagram of the system. So again, implanted device, that data is moved remotely, so maybe when the patient's sleeping, daily or weekly, into our, we'll call it the cloud. And then the alerts then can be seen by the clinician, physician. It can be presented in many, many different ways. The patient themselves, not yet, but soon we'll be able to see an alert as well. But one thing, and I'm going to go over a couple of different examples here. You do need to turn the communicator on. So I'm going to show you some examples where that didn't happen. All right, so now I'm going to go through a couple of examples. So this is marketed and approved in Europe, the US, several different areas in Asia, not yet in Korea. We're working on that. And this is an example of where of such a patient where the communicator, as I mentioned, was not plugged in. That happens actually more frequently than not. And they came into the clinic because they were feeling poorly. So that would be two. So one is that when the alert was presented, the physician couldn't see the alert because the patient didn't plug in the machine to move the alert. But they felt poorly, came into the clinic. They noted worsening symptoms as well as the communicator had not been plugged in. And therefore, they were able to intervene before they showed up in the emergency room and start them on Entrestro. What this means is this was able to alert if the patient had plugged in the communicator. They could have even intervened sooner. But then once that intervention was done, in this case, get them started on their pharmacologicals, they lost 30 pounds and did quite well after that. We'll see another one here. So in this case, again, the communicator was not plugged in. The patient did finally plug it in after a little bit. You can see probably about a week. And alert was sent immediately after that. So after that alert was sent, again, they got the patient back. They were non-compliant on their drugs. They got them a compliant, and the patient recovered very nicely. And not every one of these sensors and the data associated would indicate that alert, so it's a combination again of things. Sure. Okay. So we aren't done studying this, and we're continuing on. So we have a two-phase clinical trial, one a smaller one, to look at how we can improve the alert even better, maybe better increase the sensitivity, tweak the algorithm, and then a much larger study to really look at patient outcomes and then gather more clinical data and evidence so that the community would embrace this. That's right. This one. Oh, no, there should have been a summary slide. There. So really quickly, in summary, there's a multi-sensor index that we created. It took over 10 years, a lot of collaboration with physicians and engineers and scientists. We validated it. The sensitivity is fantastic on this and specificity, especially relative to the other options on the market. And we were able to, as importantly, provide this alert 34 days in advance. I will say that we aren't stopping with this at the implantable device because not all heart failure patients have that. So we're moving, kind of going inside the body, out. And so we will be incorporating this technology in our implantable loop recorder and then also a wearable. And that is it. The rest is just legal stuff. There. Thank you.